picture this. You are, sitting in a sleek, glass-walled conference room.
Oh, yeah. The AC is humming in the background.
Exactly. And your resume is printed on that, ridiculously thick, expensive paper.
The good stuff.
Right, the really heavy stock. And you are just absolutely nailing the conversation. I mean, you've perfectly summarized your past experience. You've navigated all those tricky questions about your industry knowledge.
You're pretty much already picking out the color of your new office chair at this point.
You really are. And then the interviewer leans forward, looks you dead in the eye, and asks, "What is your greatest weakness?"
Oh, man.
Or, maybe they pivot to, "Tell me about a time you failed." And suddenly the whole dynamic just shifts.
The temperature in the room certainly seems to drop, the second those inquiries are introduced.
Yeah, your mouth goes completely dry.
It's just a moment of acute vulnerability for anyone.
It really is. And we've all been in that exact chair. It's kind of a universal friction point in any professional career, So today we are going under the hood of those high stakes moments. We're pulling from a really fascinating piece of source material today, excerpts from a guide called Mastering the Art of Professional Interview Reframing.
It's a great deep dive.
It is. And the mission for this deep dive is to equip you, the listener, with the exact linguistic nuances and psychological frameworks you need to navigate these perceived trap questions.
Right, because we want to turn those moments into wins.
Exactly. We're going to look at how to turn a conversation about your shortcomings into an actual demonstration of competence.
Because the goal isn't merely to survive these questions, or to find some clever way to dodge them.
Right.
It is about understanding the cognitive biases of the person sitting across the table. And, utilizing precise language to project high-level emotional intelligence and self-regulation.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we can get to the practical vocabulary upgrades the guide recommends, we really need to understand why our default instincts in these moments tend to backfire so predictably.
Yeah, they really do.
When that pressure hits, our communication strategies often just unravel into one of two distinct extremes.
They do. And it stems directly from how our brains process threat. I mean, the first instinct is just pure panic-driven oversharing.
Oh, the word vomit.
Exactly. Your fight or flight response kicks in, and suddenly you find yourself in a confession booth.
Right, you just have to admit everything.
Yeah, you start admitting to this sprawling, unmanageable flaw. You're rambling about how you consistently mismanage your time, or you constantly clash with authority figures.
You're basically providing evidence against your own competence.
You are. You're giving them reasons not to hire you.
But then there's the second instinct, which is, I'd argue it's maybe more damaging because of how common it is.
The classic pivot.
Right. It's the instinct to deploy the cliche manufactured answer. The classic, "My biggest flaw is that I'm just too much of a perfectionist."
Ooh, yes. Or, "I simply cared too much about my work."
Right. It's just a humble brag disguised as vulnerability.
Which is so transparent.
It is. And the source material is unequivocal about this. Interviewers see right through that answer. It instantly degrades the trust in the room.
It really does. It's almost insulting to their intelligence.
It's imagine you have this massive, highly visible dent in the side of your car.
Okay, yeah.
And instead of taking it to a body shop to have it repaired, you try to hide it by slapping a cheap, brightly colored bumper sticker right over the damage.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Right. You're driving around thinking, you've solved the problem. But the interviewer is staring right at the dent, and now they are also judging your attempt to cover it up.
Yeah, they see the underlying damage, plus the dishonesty of the sticker.
Exactly.
That bumper sticker analogy captures the psychological dynamic perfectly, actually.
Okay.
The interviewer knows you have dents. Every single candidate who sits in that chair has dents.
We're all human.
Right. So by utilizing a fake weakness, you aren't convincing them that you are flawless.
You're just showing them you're hiding something.
Exactly. You are signaling one of two highly undesirable traits. Either you completely lack self-awareness, or you are comfortable being fundamentally dishonest when you're cornered.
And neither of those inspires confidence in a potential hire.
No, not at all.
So if we know the perfectionist bumper sticker is ineffective, why do we instinctively reach for it? I mean, why is it so incredibly difficult to just offer a balanced, normal assessment of our own shortcomings?
Well, what's fascinating here is the underlying psychological barrier. It's our linguistic focus on deficit.
What do you mean by deficit?
Like when we hear words like weakness or flaw, our brains tend to process those concepts as permanent static traits.
Ah, I see.
We view a weakness as an unchangeable deficit in our character. So candidates face what feels like this impossible tightrope walk.
Yeah, they want to be honest, but...
But they subconsciously believe that admitting to a flaw is equivalent to admitting they are permanently broken.
Oh, wow. That perfectly explains the panic. Because if I sit there and say, I struggle with data analysis, I'm internalizing that as, I will always be terrible at data analysis, and therefore I am an unviable candidate.
Precisely. The fake weakness acts as this defense mechanism against confessing to a permanent deficit.
Right.
So to successfully navigate this, the source guide suggests we have to fundamentally rewire our relationship with the concept of a flaw.
Okay.
We have to strip away the language of deficit and replace it entirely with the language of growth and process.
And the guide offers a very tangible framework for this, outlining what it calls the weakness formula.
Yes, the weakness formula.
Which is self-awareness plus action, because we need a third option between ruining trust with a fake answer and ruining our value with a permanent deficit.
Exactly. Self-awareness plus action creates a balanced equation.
How does that work in practice?
Well, you are demonstrating to the interviewer that you recognize your own professional gaps. That is the self-awareness part.
Right.
While simultaneously proving you are already taking steps to close those gaps, which is the action part.
That makes total sense.
And to execute this, the source actually recommends systematically banning certain static words from your interview vocabulary.
Like what?
Words like bad at or flaw or terrible.
Because those words function as dead ends. They trigger the interviewer's negativity bias, cementing the idea of a permanent deficit.
Exactly.
Let's look at how this applies to a concrete, hard skill. Suppose your genuine weakness is that you freeze up during presentations.
Okay, common problem.
Right. So instead of saying, I'm bad at public speaking, the guide recommends saying, public speaking is an area for growth for me.
Notice the syntactic shift there. I am bad at was an identity statement. You were internalizing the failure.
Yeah, it sounds so heavy.
It does. But by saying public speaking is an area for growth, you externalize the skill. You create this psychological distance between your core competence and the specific task you are working on.
So it implies forward momentum rather than a static dead end.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense for a hard skill, but let's push this into a behavioral weakness, which is usually trickier.
Behavioral is always tougher, yeah.
Right. Say you tend to be a micromanager.
Oh, that's a good way.
Instead of saying, I get stressed and try to do everything myself, the guide suggests the following upgrade. I am actively refining my ability to delegate tasks when project volumes are high.
It's brilliant because you've taken a chaotic, emotional state, getting stressed, and replaced it with an objective, manageable process.
Yeah, so it sounds way more professional.
You've identified the trigger, which is high project volumes, and the targeted solution, which is delegation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because when I read a phrase like actively refining my ability to delegate tasks, a part of me pushes back a little bit.
Really? Why?
Well, does that specific phrasing risk sounding too rehearsed? I mean, if someone drops that exact sentence in a conversational interview, do they sound like a corporate robot reading a script?
Well, it's a common concern, for sure. But context and delivery are key here.
Right. You can't just sound monotone.
Exactly. Assuming your tone remains conversational, this kind of phrasing, which the text actually refers to as interview English, it serves a vital purpose.
Which is what?
It demonstrates a high degree of emotional regulation. But you have to remember, interviewers aren't therapists.
No, definitely not.
They aren't looking for raw, unfiltered emotional vulnerability. They're looking for a colleague who can process their own stress professionally.
Oh, that's a really good point.
So by using elevated process-oriented language, you prove that you manage your own professional development.
You are acting as the CEO of your own skill set, essentially. You are showing them the steering wheel, not just the flat tire.
Oh, I love that. That's a great way to synthesize it. And the source reinforces this by introducing the past, present, future framework to structure these answers.
Let's walk through the specific example from the text to see how that framework operates neurologically.
Okay, let's do it.
It starts by situating the weakness in the past. So the candidate says, in the past, I found presenting to large groups to be quite intimidating, and it was definitely an area of development for me.
The phrasing there is highly intentional. It was intimidating. It was an area of development.
Emphasizing the past tense.
Right. You are acknowledging the weakness, but grammatically trapping it in the past.
Okay, and next, you transition to the present action. So you say, To address this, I recently joined a local speaking group and have been volunteering to lead our internal team updates.
This is the operational part of the formula.
Hmm.
You are providing empirical evidence that you don't just, passively hope to improve.
Right, you aren't just wishing on a star.
Exactly. You initiate tangible interventions.
And finally, you deliver the future result. While I'm still refining this skill, I've gained a lot of confidence and recently delivered a successful presentation to our regional managers.
It creates a complete, satisfying narrative arc. You introduce a conflict, you detail the intervention, and you conclude with a resolution.
This is very neat.
It does. And by the time you finish speaking, the interviewer's working memory is focused on your proactive success rather than the initial weakness you introduced.
So you've successfully managed the theoretical weakness question, but as we know, interviews rarely stop there.
Unfortunately not. Right.
Once you've navigated that, they often deploy what feels like, a stress test in software engineering. They want to see how the system breaks and how it reboots.
Yes.
So they ask, tell me about a specific time you failed.
The monster question. The stakes immediately escalate.
Big time.
Because you are no longer discussing theoretical areas for growth, You're being asked to provide a concrete historical accounting of a time you dropped the ball.
And applying a growth mindset to a literal mistake requires a totally different level of finesse. Why do interviewers insist on this question? It honestly feels designed just to induce panic.
It does feel that way, but they ask it to evaluate two critical dimensions, accountability and resilience. When a project goes off the rails, what is your default operational setting? Do you deflect responsibility, or do you take ownership and analyze the breakdown?
Which leads directly to the guide's non-negotiable rule number 1. Never point fingers at previous managers or coworkers.
Never.
Even if a failure was objectively a team member's fault, the moment you throw them under the bus, the hiring manager registers a massive red flag.
Huge red flag.
Because they assume that if they hire you, you will eventually be sitting in another interview blaming them.
Exactly. Deflection signals a complete lack of systemic understanding. So, to counter this, the source recommends utilizing the STAR+L method.
Right. Now, the STAR method is a fairly standard framework in corporate interviewing. It stands for situation, task, action, and result.
Very common, yeah.
But we should briefly define how that operates before adding the L. So, the situation sets the context, the task outlines your specific responsibility, the action is what you did, and the result is the outcome. But the guide argues that the addition of the L, which stands for learning, is what actually saves you when discussing a failure.
The learning component is what transforms a postmortem into a value proposition.
Oh, I like that.
And to ensure the learning takes center stage, the force introduces a metric called the 80% rule.
And the 80% rule states that when answering a failure question, 80% of your response must focus on the action and the learning.
Right.
Leaving only 20% for the situation, the task, and the actual failure itself.
This is where most candidates self-sabotage, honestly. Human nature compels us to over-explain our mistakes to prove we understand how bad they were.
Oh, absolutely. I actually had a colleague who entirely derailed a final round interview doing exactly this.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, he was asked about a missed deliverable, and he spent a solid 10 minutes agonizing over the context. Explaining the software crash, the vendor delays, the miscommunications.
Just wallowing in it.
Yes. He thought he was providing necessary context, but he just forced the interviewers to sit in the wreckage with him for 10 minutes. He didn't leave any oxygen for how he fixed it.
Yeah, by violating that 80% rule, your colleague anchored the interviewers to the deficit. The hiring manager does not want a detailed tragedy.
Right.
They want a concise redemption story.
And the vocabulary upgrades here are essential to keeping that 20% concise and objective. Suppose you mismanaged a deadline. Instead of saying, I messed up the timeline and the project was a disaster, the upgrade removes all that emotional weight.
What's the phrasing they suggest?
You say, we experienced a shift in the timeline due to a miscalculation in the initial project scope.
That is so much better. You aren't denying reality, but you are reframing a personal, moral failing into a procedural error.
Right, it's just business.
Exactly. A shift in the timeline is a measurable event. A miscalculation is just a solvable data problem.
The guide also suggests eliminating the word failure entirely, replacing it with a pivotal learning curve.
Oh, pivotal learning curve. That's good.
Let's break down the source's example of a missed product launch using STAR+L.
Okay.
So the candidate briefly establishes the situation and task they say they were leading a software launch with a tight turnaround. They spend mere seconds on the failure, admitting they miscalculated the required testing time, missing the launch date by 3 days.
So that is the 20%. They've acknowledged the error without, like you said, wallowing in it.
Right. Then they immediately pivot to the action. They took ownership, assembled the team, established a revised timeline, and communicated transparently with the client.
Nice and proactive.
Finally, they spend the bulk of their time on the L, the learning. They conclude by saying, that experience was a pivotal learning curve. It taught me to build a mandatory 15% testing buffer into all project scopes. And since implementing that system, every launch I've managed has landed exactly on schedule.
Boom. They've effectively utilized their past mistake to mistake-proof their future output.
So what does this all mean? If I'm listening to this, I might be thinking, wait, if I spend 80% of my time talking about the fix and how airtight my new systems are, aren't I essentially dodging the prompt?
They could feel that way.
Like, won't an astute interviewer feel like I am skillfully avoiding the uncomfortable reality of the failure they specifically asked about?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, we uncover the core philosophy driving the entire source text. An interview is a business meeting. It is not a confession booth.
A business meeting, not a confession booth. That distinction is critical.
It really is. The interviewer is a professional tasked with solving a business problem by allocating capital to hire you.
Right.
They do not require you to self-flagellate to prove your remorse.
They don't want your tears.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They ask about failure because they want to observe your analytical process. The silent, underlying question behind every failure prompt is actually, when you inevitably encounter friction while working for me, how efficiently can you diagnose the breakdown, and what systems will you build to ensure it never happens again?
You are providing them with the blueprints of how you rebuild after a structural failure, rather than just inviting them to stare at the rubble.
Yes, that's exactly it.
You transition from a risk to a safe, tested investment.
Exactly. You demonstrate that your systems have already been stress tested on someone else's dime, frankly.
Wow. We have covered some incredibly dense, actionable material today, taking one of the most intimidating professional interactions and deconstructing it into a manageable process.
It's a lot to take in, but so valuable.
Let's quickly synthesize the primary linguistic upgrades that can fundamentally alter the psychology of an interview. First, eliminate weakness from your vocabulary and replace it with an area for growth.
Right, because this creates psychological distance and implies forward momentum.
Second, upgrade trying to get better to actively refining my ability.
This signals emotional maturity and establishes you as the manager of your own development.
Third, reframe a terrible mistake as a pivotal learning curve.
Keeping the focus objective and procedural rather than personal and emotional.
And finally, adhere to the 80% rule and the star plus L method, focusing the overwhelming majority of your response on the action taken and the systems learned.
Because by internalizing these frameworks, you are doing much more than memorizing clever retorts.
Definitely.
You are providing your future employer with a real-time demonstration of how you process complexity, how you accept accountability, and how you regulate your behavior under pressure.
You prove that when the system breaks, you know exactly how to reboot it.
You do. And, this raises an important question, something for you to consider as you go about your week.
Okay, lay it on us.
We have applied these frameworks exclusively to the high-pressure environment of a job interview. But if treating a difficult conversation like a business meeting rather than a confession booth is so effective at building trust and demonstrating accountability,
Yeah.
how might adopting the past, present, future and star plus L frameworks transform the way we handle our annual performance reviews?
Oh, wow.
Or, taking it a step further, how might shifting from a vocabulary of deficit to a vocabulary of growth alter the way we navigate apologies and resolve conflicts within our personal relationships?
Applying the concept of actively refining my ability to a disagreement with a partner, that requires an entirely different level of self-awareness.
It does. But the mechanics of trust and accountability remain remarkably consistent, regardless of the room you are in.
That is so true. So the next time you find yourself in that glass-walled conference room or anywhere else where the stakes are high and your palms start to sweat, remember that you don't need to panic.
No panic required.
And you certainly don't need to hide behind a fake bumper sticker. You just need to show them the learning curve.